My name is Rachel Adams. I'm 31 and a psychotherapist in Boston. I've spent my life helping other people heal, never imagining that my own life was built on a cruel lie. It began when a new patient, Jane, sat in my office and described memories I was certain only I knew. A lullaby my mother used to sing, the faded floral wallpaper in my childhood bedroom, the exact plastic of my grandmother's hairbrush. When I asked my parents about it, they just laughed and said I had an active imagination. Their answer didn't fit the way the memories kept coming back. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through an old dusty trunk in the attic that my mother always called keepsakes, I found proof that stopped my breath. I have a twin sister. They had hidden her away in a psychiatric hospital for 26 years because she wasn't the perfect child they wanted. The woman who came to me as Jane is Serafina. I was stunned, horrified that the family I trusted could bury such a secret for so long. They think I'll stay quiet. They don't know that a therapist can also be a force of reckoning. I will tear down the world of lies they built and bring Serafina out of the dark. My life was a carefully curated collection of successes. I had a thriving therapy practice in the heart of Boston, a charming brownstone apartment that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street and a family that was the very definition of picturesque. The Adams family. We were the ones people pointed to at neighborhood gatherings: the successful lawyer father, Richard, the elegant, charity-chairing mother, Eleanor, the brilliant surgeon older brother, Michael, and me, Rachel, the compassionate psychologist who helped others piece their lives together. We were a portrait of New England perfection, all warm smiles, supportive words, and Sunday dinners that smelled of roasted chicken and contentment. I had spent my entire life believing in that portrait. It was the foundation upon which I had built everything. Then, Jane walked into my office. She didn't give a last name, just Jane. It wasn't unusual in my line of work. People often arrived carrying so much shame that their own name felt too heavy to speak. She was slight, with eyes that seemed to hold a perpetual storm cloud. Her file, sent over from a community crisis center, was thin. Chronic anxiety, dissociative episodes, fragmented memories of a traumatic childhood. It was a familiar, tragic summary I'd seen many times before. But from the moment she sat in the plush armchair across from me, something felt different. There was an unnerving current in the room, a strange hum of recognition that I couldn't place. I chalked it up to empathy, the professional hazard of feeling a client's pain too deeply. "Tell me what brings you here, Jane," I began, my voice calm and measured, the way I had been trained. She twisted a loose thread on the sleeve of her worn sweater. "I feel erased," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Like I'm a ghost in a life someone else lived. I have these pictures in my head, flashes, but they don't connect. There's a big, black hole where my childhood should be." "What kind of pictures do you see?" I asked gently. "A room," she said, her eyes unfocused, looking at a spot on the wall behind me. "With wallpaper, little yellow birds in cages, tiny golden cages." A cold shock, sharp and sudden, went through me. I kept my face a professional mask of calm, but inside my heart had stumbled. The nursery in our old house, the one we lived in until I was 5, had wallpaper with yellow birds in golden cages. I had a faint, dreamlike memory of tracing their outlines with my finger before I fell asleep. It was a detail so specific, so deeply buried, I hadn't thought of it in decades. "That's a very vivid image," I managed to say, my own throat suddenly tight. "What else do you remember about this room?" "A song," she whispered. "Someone humming it. It feels warm, and then it feels cold, like the sun going behind a cloud." She hummed a few bars, a simple, lilting melody that felt like a phantom limb, a piece of me I didn't know was missing. My mother's lullaby, the one she hummed to me every single night. I must have flinched, a tiny, imperceptible movement, but Jane's eyes snapped back to mine, sharp and searching. "Does that mean something to you?" "Sometimes, in therapy, we experience what's called transference," I explained, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. A client's experiences can resonate with the therapist's own life. It's a common phenomenon. I was reciting from a textbook, building a wall of clinical terms between her story and my sudden, visceral reaction. It had to be a coincidence. A bizarre, unnerving coincidence. The session continued, with Jane cautiously sharing more fragments. A memory of a swing set in a backyard with a large oak tree, a fear of thunderstorms, a favorite storybook about a lost bear. Each detail was a pinprick on the map of my own childhood. By the time our 50 minutes were up, I felt more drained than I ever had with a client. I walked her to the door, my professional smile feeling brittle and fake. "I'll see you next Tuesday, Jane," I said. She nodded, pausing for a moment at the threshold. For the first time, she said softly, I feel like someone might actually believe me. As the door clicked shut, I leaned against it, my breath coming in ragged bursts. It was impossible. My family was perfect. My childhood was idyllic. I had photos, home videos, years of happy memories to prove it. This woman was deeply troubled, her mind creating a tapestry of trauma from borrowed threads. That had to be the explanation. That night, I called my mentor, Dr. Ben Carter, a seasoned therapist with whom I consulted on difficult cases. Ben was pragmatic, kind, and had seen everything. Ben, I have a new client. Her case is unsettling. I described the session, the uncanny parallels to my own life. Rachel, you know what this is, he said calmly over the phone. It's intense countertransference. This woman's profound sense of loss is tapping into something in you. It's a testament to your empathy, but you have to be careful. Maintain your boundaries. She is not you, and her story is not yours. I know, I said, wanting to believe him. It just felt so real. The mind of a trauma survivor is a powerful and sometimes unreliable thing, he reminded me. Stick to your training. Help her build her own narrative. Don't let it deconstruct yours. I hung up, feeling a little more grounded. Ben was right. I was letting a client's narrative get under my skin. I resolved to be more clinical, more detached in our next session. The following Sunday was our mandatory family dinner. I drove to my parents' stately home in Brookline, the familiar sight of the manicured lawn and ivy-covered brick usually a source of comfort. Tonight, it felt different. There's my girl, my father boomed as I walked in, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of expensive cologne and security. Sweetheart, you look tired, my mother said, kissing my cheek, her hand cool on my skin. Working too hard, as always. Michael was already there, regaling them with a story about a complex surgery he'd performed. A real miracle worker, our Michael, my mother beamed. Dinner was the usual affair. We talked about Michael's latest medical journal publication, my father's victory in a high-profile court case, and my mother's upcoming charity gala. The conversation was a symphony of achievement, each of us playing our part. But tonight, the music sounded off-key. The perfect harmony felt forced. Fueled by a glass of wine and a restless mind, I decided to test the waters. Mom, I said casually, I was thinking about the old house in Cambridge the other day. Do you remember the wallpaper in my nursery? My mother's smile didn't falter, but her eyes tightened almost imperceptibly. Goodness, Rachel, that was a lifetime ago. I barely remember. Why do you ask? It had birds on it, didn't it? Little yellow canaries in cages. The clink of my father's fork against his plate was the only sound for a moment. He cleared his throat. You always had such a vivid imagination, Rachel, making up stories. No, I'm sure of it, I pressed, a strange urgency rising in me. And you used to hum a lullaby to me. How did it go again? Oh, for heaven's sake, Eleanor said, her voice a little too bright, a little too sharp. We have Michael's wonderful news to celebrate. Let's not get lost in dusty old memories. She gracefully changed the subject, turning her full attention back to Michael, and just like that, the conversation moved on. But I couldn't move on. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a deflection. A door being quietly but firmly shut in my face. It was the first time in my life that a piece of my own memory, presented to my parents, wasn't affirmed, cooed over, and placed lovingly into the family scrapbook of our shared history. It was denied. I drove home that night with a cold knot in my stomach. Ben's words about boundaries echoed in my head, but they were drowned out by a louder, more frightening question. What if Jane's story wasn't just her story? What if the black hole she described wasn't just in her memory, but in mine, too? Back in my apartment, I pulled out an old, leather-bound photo album. The first few pages were filled with pictures of Michael as a baby. Then, there I was. A chubby-cheeked toddler, usually held in my mother's arms or propped up next to a smiling Michael. In every photo, I was alone with them. There were no pictures of me with other children my age, no birthday parties until I was 6. I flipped to a photo of my 3rd birthday. I was sitting in front of a small cake with 3 candles, my parents and Michael beaming behind me. I looked happy. But as I stared at my own smiling face in the faded photograph, for the first time, it felt like I was looking at a stranger. A stranger in a story that was missing a page, a character, a vital piece of the truth. And a terrifying thought began to take root in my mind. Perhaps my life wasn't a curated collection of successes, but a carefully constructed lie. The week leading up to my next session with Jane was a tightrope walk over a chasm of anxiety. Every time I tried to ground myself in Ben's advice, a memory fragment would surface. The scent of my mother's perfume, the texture of the living room carpet in the old house, the specific cadence of my father's laugh. These weren't just memories anymore, they felt like clues. Evidence in a case I didn't understand. When Jane arrived, she looked even more fragile than before. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she hugged a large, worn artist's portfolio to her chest as if it were a shield. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, repeating Ben's mantra in my head, maintain your boundaries. Her story is not yours. How have you been this week, Jane? I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of professional calm. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed the portfolio on the floor, unzipped it, and pulled out a large sheet of charcoal drawing paper. She had drawn the room with the yellow bird wallpaper. The drawing was hauntingly detailed, the pattern on the curtains, the shape of the crib, the small rocking horse in the corner. It was a perfect replica of a photograph I had in an old album, a photograph of me, aged 2, sitting on that very rocking horse. I draw what I see in my head, she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the paper. It helps make it real. My blood ran cold. This is a memory from the room you mentioned? She nodded. It's clearer now, since I talked to you, but there's something else. Someone else. I leaned forward, my professionalism evaporating like mist. Who? I don't know her name, Jane said, her voice trembling slightly. She looks like me, exactly like me. We played in this room together. We had a game, we'd press our hands together, palm to palm, and pretend we were one person in a mirror. A phantom sensation tingled in my hands. The memory wasn't mine, but the image it conjured felt instantly, terrifyingly familiar. 2 small girls, mirror images, their laughter echoing softly in a sunlit room. Jane, I said, my voice strained, in cases of severe childhood trauma, it's not uncommon for the mind to create an alter ego, a separate identity to cope with the pain. It's a protective mechanism. This other girl, perhaps she's a part of you that you separated from? I was pleading with her, pleading with the universe, to make it a textbook case of dissociative identity. She looked up at me, and for the first time the storm cloud in her eyes cleared, replaced by a flash of fierce certainty. No, she said, her voice firm. She wasn't me. She was real. They took her. I remember screaming. Her face crumpled, the certainty replaced by a wave of raw, childlike grief. They took her, and then they told me I was bad for missing her, that she was never there at all, that I made her up. The session ended with Jane curled in the chair, sobbing into her hands, while I sat frozen, a silent scream trapped in my own chest. The words echoed, a perfect match to my father's casual dismissal at dinner. You always had such a vivid imagination, Rachel, making up stories. My world was tilting on its axis. After Jane left, I canceled my next client and immediately called my brother, Michael. If anyone could give me a straight, logical answer, it was him. He was a surgeon. Dealt in facts, intangible proof. Mike, it's me, I said when he answered, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I need to ask you something about when we were little. It's important. Ratch, I'm between surgeries. Can it wait? His voice was clipped, impatient. No, please, do you remember me ever having an imaginary friend? There was a pause. I could hear the sterile beep of hospital machinery in the background. An imaginary friend? What is this about? Is this one of those psychology things? Just answer the question, Michael. He sighed, a long, weary sound. I don't know, maybe. All kids have them. You were a quiet kid, always in your own little world. Mom used to say you had a rich inner life. Why? Did I ever talk about a friend who looked just like me? Like a twin? The silence on the other end of the line was heavier this time. When he finally spoke, his tone had shifted. It was no longer just impatient, it was guarded. Listen, Rachel, Dad called me after dinner on Sunday. He said you were asking strange questions, getting fixated on the past. He's worried you're letting the stress of your job get to you. Hearing all those horror stories from your patients all day, it can't be healthy. This isn't about my job, I insisted, my frustration mounting. This is about my memory. Your memory is that you had a wonderful childhood because you did, he said, his voice taking on a patronizing, clinical tone that made my skin crawl. We all did. Mom and Dad gave us everything. Maybe you should think about whether you're projecting one of your patient's issues onto our family. It's a classic case of, don't you dare psychoanalyze me, Michael, I snapped. I'm just saying, as your brother, I think you need to take a step back, he said coolly. Don't go digging for problems that don't exist. It won't end well. He made an excuse and hung up, leaving me clutching the phone, feeling more alone than ever. He hadn't answered my question. He had deflected, just like our parents. And he had used my profession, my own language, as a weapon against me. They were closing ranks. The perfect Addams family was presenting a united front against an unknown threat. My questions. My hands were shaking. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over one name I rarely called, Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister. Caroline was the family eccentric, an artist who lived in a cabin in Vermont and only showed up for major holidays, where she would sit quietly, a knowing, slightly sad smile on her face. My mother always treated her with a kind of strained politeness, referring to her as our dear, free-spirited Caroline. I pressed the call button before I could lose my nerve. "Rachel, what a surprise," she said, her voice warm but distant, like a radio signal from far away. "Hi, Aunt Caroline. Sorry to call out of the blue. I was just hoping to ask you something about when I was little." There was a pause. "Oh, you and Mom were close back then, right? I was just wondering, do you remember anything about me? When I was a toddler, was I a happy baby?" I could hear the sound of wind chimes in the background. "You were a complicated child, Rachel," she said, choosing her words with an artist's care. "There was a lot going on back then. It was a difficult time for your mother." "For all of us? Difficult how?" I pressed, my heart hammering. Another long pause. "Listen to me," she said, her voice dropping lower, becoming serious. "Some doors are left closed for a reason. Your mother built a beautiful house, Rachel, but the foundation is full of secrets. You need to decide if you really want to go into the basement." "What secrets?" I whispered, my mouth dry. "Aunt Caroline, please, if you know something." "I can't," she said, and for the first time I heard a tremor of fear in her voice. "I made a promise to Alina a long, long time ago. All I can tell you is this: your memory isn't lying to you. It's just incomplete. Be careful." She hung up, leaving me with the sound of the dial tone and her cryptic warning. "The foundation is full of secrets. Your memory isn't lying, it's just incomplete." It was a confirmation. A terrifying, liberating confirmation. Something had happened. Someone was missing. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat on my floor, surrounded by the photo albums again. I stared at the pictures of myself, searching my own toddler face for any sign of trauma, any hint of a secret. But there was nothing. Just a little girl, smiling for the camera, surrounded by her perfect, loving family. But they weren't perfect. They were liars, all of them. My father with his casual dismissals. My mother with her brittle smiles. My brother with his condescending concern. They had all participated in erasing something. In erasing someone, I had to find proof, something tangible. Something they couldn't deny or explain away with psychology. My mind raced. Where would they hide 30 years of secrets? Not here in my world, it would be in theirs. In the house in Brookline. The place where our family's perfect story was stored and maintained. The attic. A place of dust and forgotten things. Christmas decorations, old furniture, Michael's college textbooks. And maybe, just maybe, a box. A box that held the missing pieces of my life. A box that held the truth about the other girl. About my sister. I knew then what I had to do. I couldn't ask for permission. I couldn't warn them. I had to go into the basement. I had to break into my own past. The plan was both simple and insane. My parents were attending a weekend-long charity auction in Newport, an event my mother chaired with military precision. Michael would be on call at the hospital. The house in Brookline would be empty. I had a key, of course. I was a trusted daughter. The irony was a bitter pill. I drove there on Saturday afternoon, my stomach churning with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Letting myself into the silent house felt like a transgression. The air was still, heavy with the scent of lemon polish and my mother's hydrangeas. It smelled like secrets. Every family portrait on the wall seemed to watch me, their painted smiles judging my betrayal. I went straight for the attic stairs, hidden behind a discreet door in the upstairs hallway. The air that greeted me as I pulled the cord for the folding ladder was thick and musty, the smell of compressed time. Armed with a flashlight, I ascended into the cavernous space. The attic was exactly as I remembered, a graveyard of our family's history. Mountains of boxes were labeled in my mother's perfect cursive. Michael's school projects, holiday linens, Richard, law books. It was an archive of the official story. I was looking for the unofficial one. I needed to find the boxes with no labels, the ones tucked away in the darkest corners. For over an hour, I moved through the dusty labyrinth, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Cobwebs clung to my hair, and dust motes danced in the light like tiny ghosts. I found my old dollhouse, Michael's first chemistry set, a box of my father's cigars from a celebratory case. Everything was in its proper place. My mother was nothing if not organized. Too organized. Then I saw it. Pushed far back under the eaves, behind a stack of old winter coats that smelled of mothballs, was a large, plain wooden trunk. It was the only object in the entire attic that wasn't neatly labeled. It was sealed not with tape, but with a small, rusty padlock. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I rummaged through an old toolbox I'd spotted earlier, finding a hammer and a screwdriver. The noise of the padlock breaking echoed like a gunshot in the silent house. With trembling hands, I lifted the heavy lid. The first thing I saw was a small, faded pink blanket. Tucked underneath, it was a matching set of baby clothes, a silver rattle, and a worn, plush rabbit with one button eye. It was a baby box, but it wasn't mine. My baby things were in a pristine, white-lacquered box labeled Rachel's Firsts. This was something else, something hidden. My fingers dug deeper, past the baby clothes. I found a small stack of photographs held together by a brittle rubber band. My breath hitched. The first photo was of my mother, Alina, looking younger and softer than I had ever seen her. She was holding two babies, two identical baby girls wrapped in matching pink blankets. I sank to the floor, the dusty floorboards digging into my knees. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I stared at the image. It wasn't just me. It was us. We were real. I flipped through the other photos. The two of us in a double stroller. The two of us sitting in high chairs, smearing food on our faces. The two of us in the room with the yellow bird wallpaper, playing with the rocking horse. In every photo, we were inseparable, two halves of a whole, my vision blurred with tears. These weren't just pictures, they were proof of a life that had been stolen from me, a person who had been stolen from me. At the bottom of the trunk, under everything else, was a manila folder. The label on it was a single word, written in my father's sharp, angular handwriting. Serafina, Serafina. Her name was Serafina. I opened the folder. It was filled with documents. A birth certificate for Serafina Adams, born on the same day at the same hospital as Rachel Adams. And then, the papers that explained everything. A stack of medical reports from a place called the Blackwood Institute. Psychological evaluations, doctor's notes, incident reports. Serafina exhibits extreme behavioral issues. Unprovoked aggression, uncontrollable tantrums. A danger to herself and others, particularly her more placid twin, Rachel. Recommendation: long-term residential care for intensive behavioral therapy. The words were cold, clinical, and brutal. They were painting a picture of a monster. A child so broken, so violent, that she had to be locked away. I read about incidents of her biting, screaming for hours, destroying toys. It was a terrifying portrait. But then I saw the dates. The evaluations began when we were just 3 years old. 3. What unprovoked aggression could a 3-year-old possibly have that warranted this? The final document was a court order. A commitment paper, signed by my parents and a judge, consigning Serafina Adams, age 5, to the permanent care of the Blackwood Institute, a private psychiatric facility for troubled youth. They hadn't just sent her away. They had legally and medically erased her. They had taken a 5-year-old child and locked her away from the world, from her family, from me. The rage that filled me was a white-hot inferno. It burned away the grief, the confusion, and left behind a terrifying clarity. This wasn't a tragic necessity. This was a cover-up. My parents, the perfect Richard and Alina Adams, had a problem child, a child who didn't fit into their pristine portrait of success, so they removed her. They cut her out of the picture, literally and figuratively, and then gaslighted their remaining daughter for her entire life to protect the lie. Suddenly, a sound from downstairs shattered the silence. A car door slamming. My blood turned to ice. They were home. They weren't supposed to be home until tomorrow. I scrambled, my mind racing. I shoved the folder and a handful of the most crucial photos into my bag, closed the trunk, and tried to make it look untouched. It was a clumsy, frantic effort. I could hear the front door opening, my mother's voice calling out, "That's strange, I'm sure I locked the deadbolt." I had to get out. The attic stairs were too loud. The only other way out was a small window at the far end of the attic that led onto the steep slant of the roof. It was crazy. It was dangerous. It was my only option. Holding my breath, I crept to the window, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I managed to unlatch it and push it open. The cold evening air hit my face. Below me, the ground was a terrifying 3 stories down. "Richard, did you leave the attic door ajar?" My mother called from the hallway below. I could hear my father's heavy footsteps starting up the stairs. There was no time to think. I slung my bag over my shoulder, swung a leg out the window, and scrambled onto the slate roof, my sneakers slipping for a terrifying second before I found purchase. I flattened myself against the shingles, my body trembling, as the light from my father's flashlight swept across the attic interior. I prayed he wouldn't look toward the window. The beam moved past. I heard him mutter something about the wind, then the sound of the attic stairs folding back up, the door clicking shut. The lights downstairs went on, illuminating the lawn. I was trapped. I had to get down. Inch by terrifying inch, I slid down the roof towards a large oak tree whose branches brushed against the side of the house. It was the same oak tree from Jane's, from Seraphina's, memories. It was my only escape route. I took a deep, shuddering breath, reached for the thickest branch, and prayed it would hold my weight. My life of carefully curated success had led to this. A daughter, disowned by a truth she hadn't yet spoken, clinging to the side of her parents' perfect house, a thief in the night stealing back her own past. The branch groaned under my weight, but it held. Adrenaline coursed through me, silencing the part of my brain that was screaming about the absurdity, the sheer, heart-stopping danger of climbing down a 3-story house in the dark. My hands were scraped raw and my muscles screamed in protest, but I moved with a desperate, animal instinct. When my feet finally touched the soft grass of the backyard, I didn't pause. I ran. I sprinted across the perfectly manicured lawn, through the gate, and down the silent suburban street to where I'd parked my car, my lungs burning, the stolen folder in my bag feeling like both a bomb and a life raft. Driving back to my apartment, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the steering wheel with white-knuckled force. I kept seeing her face in the photographs. My face, Seraphina, my twin. The name felt foreign and yet intimately familiar on my tongue. Back in the safety of my apartment, I spread the documents and photos across my coffee table, the evidence of my family's monstrous betrayal. It was all there in black and white. The clinical diagnoses, the legal papers, the smiling, forgotten face of my sister. They hadn't just hidden her. They had pathologized her, labeled her as defective, a threat. Why? Because she was spirited. Because she didn't fit their mold of a placid child. And then I saw it, a detail I had missed in my frantic escape. Tucked into a side pocket of the folder was a small, sealed envelope. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, Dr. Alastair Finch, Personal. I knew that name. Dr. Finch was a legend in the Boston psychiatric community, a pioneer in childhood behavioral disorders. He was also a close family friend. He and his wife came to my parents' Christmas party every year. He always called me his favorite little psychologist and patted me on the head even now. He had been a mentor figure to me, someone whose work I admired. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't just a family friend. He was involved. He must have been the one who signed off on this, the one who gave their monstrous decision a veneer of medical legitimacy. My mind reeled. Who else knew? My brother Michael, with his guarded, warning tone on the phone. My Aunt Caroline, with her cryptic talk of secrets in the foundation. This wasn't just my parents' secret. It was a family conspiracy, a web of silence and complicity built around an empty space where my sister should have been. I had to see her. I had to talk to Jane, to Seraphina. But how? I couldn't just say, "Hi, I'm your long-lost twin sister who just discovered our parents locked you away and lied about it for 26 years. She was my client. She was fragile. The shock could shatter her. I spent the next 2 days in a fugue state, seeing my other clients on autopilot, my mind constantly circling back to the contents of the folder. I needed a plan. I needed more information. I needed to understand the Blackwood Institute. A quick search online revealed that the institute was still in operation, though it had rebranded itself as the Blackwood Wellness Center for Youth. Its website was glossy and reassuring, full of photos of serene-looking teenagers meditating in sun-drenched gardens. It promised holistic healing for complex behavioral challenges. It looked less like a psychiatric hospital and more like a luxury spa. But the reviews told a different story. Buried on obscure forums were whispers from former patients and disgruntled staff. Stories of overmedication, isolation rooms, and a culture of breaking a child's spirit under the guise of therapy. It was a place where inconvenient children were sent to be forgotten. My next session with Seraphina was scheduled for Tuesday. I knew it would be the most difficult, most critical hour of my professional life. I couldn't reveal everything, but I had to guide her, to open a door to the truth without blowing it off its hinges. When she arrived, she seemed calmer than I had ever seen her. "I brought you something," she said, pulling another drawing from her portfolio. This one was different. Wasn't a memory fragment. It was a portrait of 2 young women, their faces nearly identical, standing back to back. One stood in sunlight, the other in shadow. "It's how I feel," she explained. "Like there's 2 of me, the one everyone sees and the one that's lost in the dark." Taking a deep breath, I decided to take a professional risk, a leap of faith guided by a truth only I knew. "Jane," I began, my voice steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. "I want to try a different approach today." I want you to tell me about the girl who looks like you, not as a part of you but as a real person. Give her a name." She looked startled. "A name?" "Yes, any name that comes to mind." She thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. "Serafina," she whispered. "I don't know why, it just appeared." I fought to keep my expression neutral. "Okay, tell me about Serafina. What was she like?" "She was brave," Serafina said, a small smile touching her lips for the first time. "She wasn't afraid of anything. Not of thunderstorms, not of the dark, not of them." "Them? The parents," she said, her voice turning flat. "She would yell back when they were angry, I would hide, she would try to protect me." The narrative was still fractured, the roles still confused in her mind. Was Serafina her protector, or was she protecting Serafina? It didn't matter, the core memory was there. "What happened to Serafina?" I asked softly. The light in her eyes died. "They took her. A man in a white coat. She was screaming and kicking. They said she was sick. They said they were taking her to a special school to get better, but she never came back." The story poured out of her, raw and unfiltered. "After she was gone, the parents told me she was a bad dream. They told me I was alone. I was always alone. And if I ever mentioned her name again, they would send me to the bad place, too." Tears streamed down her face, and this time I didn't hold back. I handed her the box of tissues, my own eyes burning. Story was monstrous. They hadn't just removed her, they had terrorized the remaining child into silence. They had used the threat of the same fate to erase Serafina from my memory. "You're not crazy for remembering her," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And you weren't bad for missing her. You were a child and you lost your sister. Your grief was real." It was the first time I had used the word sister. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning, fragile hope. "Sister," I nodded slowly. "The bond you felt, the feeling that a piece of you was missing, that's real, Jane. That's the connection between twins." I was breaking every rule in the therapist's handbook. I was leading the witness, confirming a reality she hadn't fully grasped. But I wasn't her therapist anymore. Not really. I was the other half of her story. The session ended on that precipice of revelation. I didn't show her the photos or the documents. It was too soon. But I had given her a word, a concept to hold on to: sister. That night I made another call. "Dr. Finch, it's Rachel Adams." "Rachel, my favorite little psychologist, how are you, my dear?" His voice was just as I remembered, warm, avuncular, and utterly false. "I'm well, thank you," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I need to book a consultation with you. It's about a case I'm working on. A case involving repressed childhood memory and institutionalization. It concerns a former patient of yours. Her name was Serafina Adams." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. "I think you should discuss this with your father, Rachel." "No," I said, my voice hardening, the fury I'd felt in the attic returning with a vengeance. "I'm discussing it with you, my office, tomorrow at 4, be there." I hung up before he could respond. The time for asking questions was over. The time for demanding answers had begun. The web was starting to unravel, and I was going to be the one to pull every last thread. The 24 hours leading up to my meeting with Dr. Finch were the longest of my life. I operated on pure, undiluted fury. It was a clean, clarifying anger that burned away the fog of doubt and grief. I was no longer a daughter uncovering a secret. I was an advocate preparing for war. My office, once a space of calm neutrality, became my command center. I had the photos and the documents from the trunk laid out on my desk, a constellation of evidence. I stared at Serafina's face, at my face, until our images merged, until her stolen childhood felt like a phantom limb of my own. An hour before Finch was due to arrive, my intercom buzzed. It was the receptionist from the shared office space downstairs. "Rachel, a Richard and a leaner Adams are here to see you." "They don't have an appointment." My blood ran hot then cold. Of course, Finch had called them. He had warned his co-conspirators. They hadn't come to talk, they had come for damage control. "Send them up," I said, my voice eerily calm. I stood behind my desk, the documents arrayed before me like a general's battle map. When they walked in, their faces were a perfect study in manufactured concern. My mother rushed forward, her hands outstretched. "Rachel, darling, what is all this?" she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Alistair called us. He was so worried. He said you were asking about things that are better left alone. We came straight over." My father stood by the door, his arms crossed, his lawyer face firmly in place. He wasn't here as a father, he was here as an opponent's counsel. I didn't move. I didn't respond to my mother's embrace. I simply picked up the first photograph from the stack, the one of her holding 2 identical babies. I held it up. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice devoid of any warmth. Eleanor's face went pale. The feigned concern dissolved, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. She looked to my father for support. "Now, Rachel," Richard began, his tone condescending and authoritative, "you are clearly overwrought. You have been under a great deal of stress, and you've taken a patient's tragic fantasy and projected it onto your own life." "Her name is Serafina," I said, my voice cutting through his explanation like glass. "And she is not a fantasy. I found her birth certificate. I found the court order you signed. I found everything in a trunk in the attic." The color drained from my father's face. The lawyer was gone, replaced by a man whose carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. My mother sank into one of the client chairs, her hand fluttering to her throat. "You don't understand," she whispered, her eyes wide with a desperation I had never seen before. "We did it to protect you. Protect me." I let out a laugh, a harsh, ugly sound that didn't belong in this serene room. Protect me from what? From having a sister? From knowing a part of myself was missing my entire life? "She was sick, Rachel," my father boomed, regaining his footing, his voice filled with a righteous anger. "She was violent, uncontrollable. She would have destroyed our family. She would have destroyed you. Your life, your success, everything you are is because we made the hardest decision parents could ever make. We chose to save one of our daughters by sacrificing the other. It was a sacrifice. For you." His words were meant to sound noble, tragic. But all I heard was the monstrous, selfish calculus of their decision. They hadn't sacrificed a child, they had disposed of an inconvenience. "So you locked a 5-year-old girl in an institution and erased her from existence," I stated, the facts laid bare, stripped of his self-serving justification. "And you lied to me every single day for 26 years. You watched me grow up, you praised my empathy, you encouraged me to become a therapist to heal others, all while knowing you were the source of my deepest, most inexplicable wound." The door opened, and Dr. Alistair Finch walked in. He was holding a briefcase, his face a grim, professional mask. He took in the scene, my parents, pale and defensive, me, standing behind a desk littered with evidence, and nodded slowly. "I see you've already begun the conversation," he said, his voice calm, as if he were entering a routine family therapy session. "Save it, Alistair," I said, my gaze locking onto his. "The time for professional courtesy is over. You put your name on those documents. You gave them the medical justification they needed to throw away their child. You stood by and watched this happen, and you called me your favorite little psychologist at Christmas parties. I want to know why." He had the audacity to look pained. "Rachel, your parents were in an impossible situation. Serafina, she was not like you. She had a profound oppositional defiant disorder with aggressive tendencies that were unresponsive to any known therapy at the time. She was 3 years old when you started diagnosing her." I shot back. "What known therapy did you even try? Or did you just see a spirited, difficult child who was embarrassing my parents at their country club gatherings?" Finch flinched, a direct hit. My father stepped forward. "There was an incident," he said gruffly. "At the admissions interview for the Briarwood Academy, a very prestigious preschool. Serafina had an episode. She screamed, she threw things, she bit the head mistress. It was a humiliating disaster. It was the final straw. We knew then that she could not function in the world we had built for you." There it was, the ugly, narcissistic truth. It wasn't about saving me. It was about saving their reputation, their ambition, their perfect portrait. Serafina was a flaw in the canvas, so they cut her out. "And you helped them do it," I said, turning back to Finch. "You used your reputation, your power, to make it all look legitimate. You signed your name to a lie." "It was not a lie," Finch insisted, his voice rising. "The diagnosis was valid, if perhaps expedited. The prognosis was poor. I believed then, and I believe now, that I was acting in the best interest of the family unit. I was protecting the healthy child's potential from being consumed by the pathology of the sick one." The clinical, detached cruelty of his words stole my breath. He was talking about 2 little girls, 2 sisters, as if it were a lab experiment. He wasn't a doctor. He was a monster. I looked at the 3 of them, my father, the tyrant, my mother, the silent accomplice, and the doctor, the corrupt enabler, the architects of my life and the destroyers of my sisters. A profound, final calm settled over me. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind the cold, hard certainty of conviction. "Get out," I said, my voice low and steady. My mother gasped. "Rachel, you can't." "Get out of my office," I repeated, my voice rising, resonating with a power I didn't know I possessed. "All of you, you are not welcome here. You are not welcome in my life. You talk about sacrifice, about difficult choices. You sacrificed nothing. You took the easy way out. You threw a child into the dark because you were afraid of her light. You didn't protect me. You mutilated me. You cut away a part of my soul, and then you told me to be grateful for the wound. The conversation is over. My father started to speak, to argue, but for the first time, he saw something in my eyes that stopped him. The compliant, dutiful daughter he had raised was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman he did not know and could no longer control. Without another word, they turned and left. Dr. Finch was the last one out, pausing at the door to give me a look that was a mixture of pity and warning. I met his gaze without flinching until he finally closed the door behind him. I stood in the silence of my office, the air still vibrating with the toxicity of the confrontation. I was shaking, utterly drained, but I was also free. The lie was broken. The truth was out. The war had just begun, but I had won the first, most important battle, the battle for my own reality. I walked to the window and looked down at the street as their three figures retreated down the sidewalk, not speaking, not touching, three separate islands of guilt. I knew they would regroup. They would hire lawyers. They would fight me, but they were no longer fighting their daughter. They were fighting Serafina's sister. I picked up my phone and called my mentor, Ben Carter. "Ben," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I don't need a consultation. I need a lawyer. The best one you know for patient advocacy and medical malpractice. I have a sister to get out of a cage." Ben didn't just give me a name, he gave me a lifeline. Sarah Jenkins was a force of nature, a sharp, empathetic lawyer who specialized in fighting for the rights of those lost in the labyrinth of the mental health care system. When I laid out the contents of the folder on her polished conference room table, her expression shifted from professional interest to barely concealed outrage. "They didn't just commit her," Sarah said, her voice a low, angry hum as she examined the court order. "They essentially signed a civil death warrant. The terms of this commitment gave the Blackwood Institute complete and total authority over her life, her treatment, her contact with the outside world. It's airtight, draconian, and it was signed by a judge who was a known golf partner of your father's." The cronyism, the sheer, casual corruption of it all was sickening. "So what can we do?" I asked, my own hope faltering in the face of the legal fortress my parents had built. "We fight," Sarah said, a determined glint in her eye. "We file an emergency petition for a competency hearing and a review of her commitment. We'll argue that she was a minor, that the initial diagnosis was flawed and prejudiced, and that she has been held for 26 years without adequate independent review. It's a legal Hail Mary, but it's our only shot at getting her out." While Sarah and her team buried themselves in legal filings, my role shifted. I could no longer ethically be Serafina's therapist. I had crossed that boundary irrevocably. I referred her to a trusted colleague, Dr. Anya Sharma, explaining only that I had a personal conflict of interest that made continuing our sessions impossible. The call was one of the hardest I'd ever had to make. "I don't understand," Serafina said, her voice small and laced with the familiar fear of abandonment. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," I said, my heart aching. "You did everything right. This has nothing to do with you and everything to do with me. I promise you I am not leaving you. I'm just changing how I can help you. Can you trust me?" There was a long pause. "You're the first person who ever saw me," she whispered. "I'll trust you." The next few weeks were a blur of strategy sessions, affidavits, and sleepless nights. My family, as expected, retaliated. My father hired a team of corporate lawyers who filed motion after motion to dismiss our case. They painted me as an unstable, vindictive daughter, unduly influenced by a manipulative patient, attempting to extort money from her loving parents. They used my own profession against me, subpoenaing my professional records, trying to find any hint of misconduct. Michael, my brother, submitted a sworn affidavit testifying to Serafina's violent and disturbed nature as a child, and stating that in his professional medical opinion, my actions were deeply irrational and concerning. The betrayal stung, but it no longer surprised me. He was one of them. He had always been one of them. The only crack in their united front was Aunt Caroline. A week after the confrontation, a package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden bird and a letter. "Rachel," it read, "I was a coward. For 30 years, I have lived with the guilt of my silence. Elinor made me promise, and I was young and afraid of your father, but you are not afraid. Enclosed is a check. It is most of my savings. Use it to right the wrong I helped create. Bring your sister home." Her words and the tangible support they represented were a balm to my frayed nerves. I wasn't entirely alone. The day of the hearing arrived, a cold, gray Boston morning. The courtroom was small and stuffy. My parents sat on one side with their team of lawyers, their faces set like stone. I sat on the other with Sarah. Serafina was not present. Sarah had argued successfully that forcing her to attend would be traumatic and prejudicial. The battle was brutal. My father's lawyers portrayed Serafina as a ticking time bomb, presenting Michael's affidavit and Dr. Finch's original, damning diagnoses. They argued that releasing her would be a danger to society, and most particularly to me. Dr. Finch took the stand, his voice oozing professional gravitas as he described a profoundly disturbed child, a classic case of pathology that required lifelong containment. Then it was Sarah's turn. She was magnificent. She systematically dismantled Finch's testimony, citing newer research, questioning his outdated methods, and forcing him to admit that Serafina hadn't had a single independent psychological evaluation in over 2 decades. "So, for 26 years," Sarah asked, her voice ringing through the quiet courtroom, "you have simply assumed that a diagnosis you made of a 5-year-old child remains valid for a 31-year-old woman without ever seeking a second opinion." Finch stammered, his professional mask slipping. The Institute's internal reviews were sufficient. Internal reviews conducted by a facility that is paid handsomely every year by this family to keep this woman locked away. Sarah countered, letting the implication hang in the air. Our final witness was a surprise. A former nurse from the Blackwood Institute, a woman named Maria, whom Sarah's investigators had tracked down. She was in her 60s now, her face lined with a quiet sadness. She testified that she remembered the Addams twins. "The little one who was left, Rachel, she was quiet," Maria said, her voice soft but clear. "But Serafina, she wasn't violent. She was fierce. She was a child with a spirit that was too big for the cage her parents wanted to put her in. She fought back. They called it pathology. I called it survival." She went on to describe the Institute's methods, the overmedication to keep the children docile, the long periods of isolation for any act of defiance. It wasn't treatment. It was a prison designed to break a child's will. As Maria spoke, I saw my mother flinch. For the first time, a crack appeared in her icy composure. A tear traced a path down her perfectly made-up face. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, refusing to show an ounce of emotion. The judge, a stern, thoughtful woman named Eleanor Washington, listened to everything without expression. After the final arguments, she called a recess to review the evidence. We sat in the tense, silent courtroom for what felt like an eternity. When she returned, she looked directly at my parents. "For 26 years," she began, her voice cold with contempt, "you have used your wealth and influence to hide your own parental failings. You did not seek help for your daughter. You sought to dispose of her. This court finds the original commitment order to be the product of a profound and egregious conflict of interest, based on archaic and biased diagnostic practices." She then turned her gaze to me. "This court orders that Serafina Addams be immediately released from the care of the Blackwood Institute and placed into the temporary legal guardianship of her sister, Rachel Addams. A full, independent psychiatric evaluation is to be conducted within 30 days to determine her competency and future needs. This hearing is adjourned." A strangled sob escaped my mother's lips. My father sat, for the first time in his life, utterly defeated, his face ashen. I felt a surge of triumph, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. Sarah gripped my arm, her own eyes shining. "We did it," she whispered. "We did it. We had won." That afternoon, I drove to the Blackwood Wellness Center, the court order clutched in my hand like a golden ticket. It was a sprawling, beautiful estate that looked like a country club, but the manicured lawns and smiling staff couldn't hide the oppressive sense of despair that clung to the place. I was met by the facility's director, a man with a cold, reptilian smile who tried to drown me in paperwork. I simply handed him the court order. "I am her legal guardian now. Bring her to me." I waited in a sterile, white room, and then the door opened. She walked in, flanked by 2 nurses. She was wearing the same worn sweater I'd seen in my office, her eyes wide and frightened. She looked at me, then at the nurses, then back at me, her mind struggling to process what was happening. I stepped forward, my heart overflowing. "It's okay," I said softly, holding out my hand. "It's me, Rachel, I'm here." She hesitated for a moment, then her eyes fell on the small, hand-carved wooden bird from Aunt Caroline, which I had pinned to my jacket. Her own hand went to her neck, where a nearly identical, though much older and more worn, bird hung from a leather cord. It was a piece of a matching set we must have had as children. A connection, a memory she had clung to for all these years. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition. Rachel, she whispered, the name a confirmation, a prayer. I closed the distance between us and wrapped my arms around her. She was thin, fragile, but she was real. My sister. I held her as she sobbed, 26 years of stolen time, of silent grief pouring out of her. I've got you, I whispered into her hair, my own tears falling freely. I've got you, let's go home. Bringing Serafina home was like coaxing a wild, beautiful bird out of a cage where it had lived for so long it had forgotten the sky. My apartment, once a sanctuary of solitude, became a space of quiet rediscovery. The first few days, she moved like a ghost, her footsteps barely making a sound. She would stand for hours by the window, watching the traffic, the pedestrians, the simple, chaotic dance of a world she had only ever seen from behind reinforced glass. There were challenges, of course. 26 years of institutionalization had left deep scars. She had no concept of money. She was overwhelmed by the choices in a grocery store, and the sound of a closing door could send a tremor of panic through her. Her official diagnosis, after a thorough and compassionate evaluation by a team Sarah Jenkins had assembled, was complex PTSD. There was no oppositional defiant disorder. There was no pathology. There was only trauma. The symptoms my parents and Finch had used to condemn her were the predictable reactions of a spirited child to a sterile, unloving environment. We didn't talk much about the past at first. Instead, we built a new present. I taught her how to use a smartphone, and she took to photography with a fierce, artistic passion, capturing small moments of beauty I had always overlooked. We discovered we had the same strange sense of humor and the same love for old black and white movies. In her quiet, hesitant way, she began to fill the empty spaces in my life I never knew existed. She was the echo to my own thoughts, the missing harmony to the melody of my life. One evening, we were looking through the old photographs from the trunk. She traced her own smiling face in a picture of the two of us on the swing set. I remember this, she whispered. I was trying to swing so high I could touch the sun. You were yelling at me to be careful. I'm still that person, I said with a small smile. She looked at me, her eyes clear and direct. They said I would have destroyed you, she said, the words heavy with the indoctrination of a lifetime. I took her hand. They were wrong, I said firmly. They didn't save me from you, Fina. They stole you from me. My life was never whole without you. I just didn't know what was missing. Her legal battle was far from over. We filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the Blackwood Institute, Dr. Finch, and our parents for wrongful confinement and medical malpractice. The case became a media sensation, a spotlight thrown onto the dark, unregulated corners of the private mental health industry. My father's reputation was shattered. My mother retreated from her charity circles, a pariah in the society she had valued above her own child. Michael sent me a single, bitter text. You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy. I didn't reply. The family he was mourning was a fantasy, and I was done living in it. A year after Serafina's release, we won. The settlement was substantial, a validation of her suffering and a punishment for their crimes. But the money was never the point. It was about accountability. It was about the truth. Serafina used a portion of the money to enroll in art school. Her drawings, once a way to document her fragmented memories, became a powerful voice. Her first gallery show, titled The Girl in the Mirror, was a raw, beautiful, and sometimes brutal depiction of her journey. It was a triumph. I stood with her on the opening night, watching as people moved through the gallery, their faces etched with emotion. My Aunt Caroline was there, her eyes filled with tears of pride. Ben Carter was there, along with Sarah Jenkins and Dr. Sharma. This was our family now, a family forged not by blood, but by truth and loyalty. Later that evening, Serafina and I stood on my balcony, looking out at the glittering Boston skyline. She was no longer the fragile, haunted woman who had walked into my office. She was vibrant, confident, her spirit shining brightly. Do you ever think about them? She asked quietly. I knew who she meant. Sometimes, I admitted. I don't feel anger anymore, just a kind of sad emptiness. They built a perfect house, but it had no room for love, only for ambition. I used to dream about them, she said, her voice soft. That one day they would come and say they made a mistake, but they never did. Their mistake wasn't sending you away, Fina, I said, turning to her. Their mistake was underestimating us. She smiled, a real, brilliant smile that reached her eyes. Thank you, Rachel, for going into the basement. You would have done the same for me, I said, and I knew with every fiber of my being that it was true. My story, and Serafina's, is not just one of family betrayal. It's a testament to the fact that the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, has a way of fighting its way to the surface. It is a story about the unbreakable bond between two sisters, a bond that survived lies, walls, and 26 years of stolen time. We learn that the families we are born into do not have to define us. We have the power to break free from the narratives written for us and to write our own. Sometimes, the most courageous act is to question the perfect picture on the wall, to demand to see what has been cut away, to find the missing pieces of our own souls. Losing the family you thought you had can be terrifying, but finding the family that truly sees you, that fights for you, and that loves you unconditionally, that is the greatest healing of all. And sometimes, in order to find them, you first have to find yourself.